Thank you. Today is Monday, September 13th, 2021, and we will call the school committee meeting to order at 5:32 p.m. and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Agenda item number 2, our school committee member introductions.
Bruce Damon, Ward 1.
Janet Bowden, Ward 2.
Ward 3 is currently open. If you are interested, you should apply at the city clerk's office. And Jake Langless, superintendent.
Megan Parks at large.
Tanya Whitlow, Ward 4.
Linnea Hawkins, Ward 5.
Ron Potvin, Ward 6.
Paul Bopelant, Ward 7.
Luke Jensen, City Council Rep.
Thank you. Agenda item number 3 is the consent agenda. Are there any items on the consent agenda that members would like set aside? Seeing none, the consent agenda is adopted. Agenda item number 4 is public input. Members of the public may address the school committee for up to 3 minutes on non-agenda items now and on agenda items later. Comments that pertain to staff, personal matters, or a student issue should be directed to the superintendent or the appropriate staff member of Lewiston Public Schools. Public comments shall be directed to the school committee and be brief, not repetitive, and related to the matter at hand. Before starting, please state your name, address, and affiliation with Lewiston Public Schools. Are there any people present that would like to speak? Are there any online attendees that would like to speak? Seeing none, we will continue to agenda item number 5, to receive and approve snow day approaches. Superintendent Langless will present.
So I shared a letter in the packet and I will put it up on the screen here if I can. To discuss some a few different snow day options. And just wanted members of the public to be able to see this, but also just to reference it. But essentially, we learned a lot last year with days that we didn't have school. Last year, we had an executive order or a waiver, I should say, from the governor. There's actually 2 layers to that waiver. It existed and then it was extended for last school year. It has sunsetted. It doesn't exist anymore. And what that means this year, different from last year, if we have a snow day, last year we didn't have to add it on to the end of the day because they were saying we're doing our best to be in school, but there's a lot to think about. Now, with that waiver gone, if we have a snow day, we have to put it on the end of the school year and make that snow day up. Or there's some other things you can do to get waivers if you have some extenuating circumstances. And obviously there's different mechanisms in which you can attempt to make up those school days using other means like vacation days, things like that, which we pretty strongly try to avoid. I've only heard that brought up, I think, once in all my years here in a serious conversation in the last decade or so. And that was a year that we had something like 7 snow days. So we try not to go there, but Mother Nature doesn't always cooperate. But one of the things that some other districts did was they had remote days on the snow days. And because of the waiver, they didn't have to provide things like nutrition and what have you, but they wanted to keep kids engaged with school. And I think that we can learn from both of those setups and really start to think about having the option through a school committee policy, or if you approve these approaches, to say, if we can meet the requirements that the state has to have a truly remote day on a school day, which means we need to provide nutrition and specially designed instruction. Those are the 2 biggies right now, and you have to submit a plan and it has to get approved by the state to do remote school days. The alternative is to have and maintain the traditional snow day. So when we have significant weather, inclement conditions, that we can stay in and enjoy a movie, read a book, go shovel, play in the snow, things of that nature. And I think that was well received last year when we knew we had a big one coming, that we just said, look, there's no school, take the day, have a snow day. But to not do that every time if it's not warranted, so that we don't keep piling days into June or having a hard time meeting all those 175 school day requirements. And so that's what I proposed, to have the option to do both of those things and to make sure the school committee was aware and approve that as an option.
Would that look like, what in the past was just this is a no school day, there would be an announcement of this is a no school day, it counts as a remote day, or like you would qualify each one?
We would have to message out just like we do now, telling families that this is a remote day versus this day school day. And there's a lot of things that go into play with that. For example, from an instructional perspective, we can send things home in advance and just say, hey, if we have a remote day because of weather, this is what you'll work on. We want you to keep that. Teachers are available, electronic means if that's a viable option. But because we're not as remote or hybrid as we were last year, we're not sending machines home with every single kid every single day. So we may have inclement weather days where we say, you're not on your iPad or your laptop, you're actually working on this material that your teacher has done some pre-teaching around, and there's some options for teacher support, but it's not necessarily like a full school day. So those are some of the criteria that we have to be thoughtful of. Member
Beauplan?
Thank you. When is the last scheduled day for students under the current calendar?
I'd have to check, but I think it's, is it the 17th? I thought it was the 14th. I know it's late this year because of the way the holidays land.
Mhm.
And that's without snow days.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Member Jensen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. What are the expectations going to be for teachers as far as delivering that kind of instruction? Is it going to be expected to be a continuation of what they've been doing in the day's lessons? Is it something that's, I don't want to say busy work, but something that's not necessarily connected to what the teacher was doing in the class that week?
I think it's a great question. So a part of this effort in the application to the state to do remote days, we do have to meet certain criteria. So teachers would be on, if you will, whether or not it's a continuity of what you did yesterday in class or the day before versus a one-off activity, teachers would still have the responsibility to craft that, pre-teach that, revisit that. But it shouldn't be, snow day word finds and things like that. It should have an educational benefit to it.
Yeah, I guess the big concern I have for that is I don't want teachers to have to work harder on remote days than they would normally. And so if the trade-off has to be that students just don't have as much work, then to me, that's a very, very fair trade-off. So I just hope that whatever system we come up with kind of gears towards that, to just make sure that we reduce the work on staff members. But I trust that that's going to happen. So thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a great question because my vision of it is more to that effect, more of it's not safe to travel today, but we're not going to just do nothing. And so while there'll be tasks and work and things that need to be done so that people do work, it's not going to be like the bell ring at 8, then the bell ring at 9, but they would be providing students with those materials and supporting them. But a more laid back approach, I would think.
Member Beauplan?
Thank you. I would perceive it as something like an emergency lesson plan that I know some teachers are required to have just in case they run into the pucker brush on the way to school. It may not be fitting the curriculum chronologically, thematically, but learning would take place. That being said, is there any problem with the teacher union on developing a plan like that, which is, again, above what they have to do?
Yeah, so we have had conversation with members of the association who have said that they kind of like this idea and want to see where it can go. But I do think both to your point and Member Jensen that we need to be very mindful of what it is we're asking teachers to do. But I also want to be mindful of what we're asking students to do. Karen and I have even had conversations around what if it's a grade 1 something that everybody can get behind. And, the 2021-22 school year had these 3 activities for snow days in case we're remote. And so it was more comprehensive and built and not a big lift so that teachers don't have to look up on a Monday and think, well, there's a chance of snow Wednesday, so I got to work 5 more hours this afternoon to create this thing and figure it out. We want to make it manageable.
And then there would probably be extra time on their part on the flip side of it too, to grade those extra assignments as well.
I think there's no shortage of the amount of work our teachers do. I know that.
Any other discussion? Yes, Ms. Willow.
I mean, could it be even as simple as, like, if it's a snow day and the teacher's just available for any of the kids to have extra help, they need to finish up some other stuff, but maybe some of the class is all caught up and they don't do anything. Is that kind of what your thought could be?
So like a kind of what we used to call a remediation day,
Yeah.
where it was like, you know, let's take a look at what's here, what needs to be done. I think that can be a great use of class time, and I would not exempt that from this. I guess I'm trying to land in kind of two lenses with this. One is that if we're calling it a day of school, that it's a day of school, and that means students do have work and that teachers are working. But knowing that it's a remote snow day and that it doesn't have to be a full court press, you know, with our foot on the pedal. And certainly we won't abuse this, but it's a nice tool to have for those days that, gosh, I could think of a couple of times in just my years here in Lewiston that you have that snow ice line or that ice rain line, and it's right on top of us. And if you travel from 7:05 to 7:36, it was treacherous, and by 8:05 it was like a spring morning. You know, those are those days where I'd like to have some autonomy to say, let's not run the roads at that time, and let's grab a remote day.
Yes, Ms. Willow.
So are you asking us to approve giving administrators, giving you just the autonomy to say, okay, on Friday, we know there's a huge storm coming. We're just going to say, hey, we're going to take it a snow day, or just giving the autonomy. So you're looking for a vote to just approve that.
Yeah, I'm looking for a vote, but I think the results of any vote, unless amended, would say in inclement weather that the superintendent has three options, or, well, there's a handful of options. There's the delay, which I don't love. I think those can actually be quite messy, but they're a tool if we need them. There's no school, obviously. There's go to school and figure it out. And then this would be adding another option of having a remote day. So I think any vote would be saying those options are available to the superintendent. I actually think that the delay days, the late start days, just calling it what it is, they're just not good. You start late, you rush nutrition, you're rushing transportation. People don't come because they're not sure what exactly, is it 1 hour, is it 2? We'd be better off to say in the morning, go to your email, go to your lesson, go to your what have you, stay home today, but we need you to be productive in this area and be in communication with your teachers and move forward. It will create some other complications, like for some hourly staff who may not work that day, but I think we can work through those. I do think it requires a vote, though.
Will it have any impact on the sending schools?
I don't think it would have an impact on the sending schools, because when they have school in Lewiston, they monitor what Lewiston's decision is. But I would also say that most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, we are in unison with what those decisions are. But for example, if you're a tech center student and you had tech class that day, your teacher would still be committed to that engagement. And so you wouldn't lose that day, but it'd be a day that you were here anyway. And we don't pause our rotation of days. So like blue, white days, if there's a no school day, that day is just kind of gone. We might move the end date if there's a lot of them, but we don't shift the order of them, if that makes sense.
Any other discussion? Would somebody like to make a motion? Member Jensen, is
Madam Chair, I move approval of the plan.
there a second?
A second.
Second.
Oh, I thought you were going to say specifically.
Oh, do you want to make a more specific motion?
I thought that's what you were asking. Is if we have something specific.
Sure. I think the language of the motion would be to add the option of a remote day for inclement weather for Lewiston Public Schools.
As needed at your discretion.
Mhm.
Are you comfortable with that motion? And are you comfortable? Okay. Do we want to open it up for any members of the public to discuss? Seeing no hands. Any further discussion from the committee before we vote? Votes are starting. Were you last?
I was first.
Okay. City Council Rep.
Yes.
Yes. Ward 1,
Yes.
Ward 2,
Yes.
Ward 4,
Yes.
5,
Yes.
6,
Yes.
7.
Yes.
Motion passes 8-0.
Thank you. Agenda item number 6, to discuss and select subcommittee appointments.
And so we, due to some just changes, I think, and some transitions, we currently have open the chair of the policy committee, the chair of the curriculum committee, and we are currently without an identified parliamentarian. I don't know if anybody's interested in any of those roles.
Member Vogelant.
Seems I've spent the better part of my history of time on committee work on curriculum. I'd like to volunteer for the curriculum committee.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Member Whitlow.
So I have a desire for policy. But being on negotiations, it takes a lot of time. I'm not saying I'm getting done negotiations. Don't give me that look, Bruce. But I do have a strong desire for policy. And I think I want to try to be involved with that. But if it's too much, I don't want to like not ever see my family ever again. So maybe.
So previously, we've only been meeting like once a month, if that.
I mean, I don't mind even like taking a bunch of stuff and being home and reading stuff through and highlighting ideas and passing it on too, if that's.
It's primarily been just getting our current policies up to date with what the state expectations are. Personally, I would like to see, now that we've adopted the equity statement, I would like to see it to go a step deeper and actually pass those policies, not just through what the state requires, but also through our equity statement to make sure all of our policies are equitable. But that's just the way I see it. That doesn't necessarily mean that anyone else has to take that either.
Do you plan to be part of the policy
I am
committee?
part of the
Oh, you
policy
are
committee,
part of the
yes.
policy committee. Oh, okay.
But Alicia was the chair. So if you are to step in, you would be the chair. And Jake is on it.
And we do have a lot of resources through the Maine School Boards Association and Maine School Superintendents Association around language that needs to be adopted because of state language shifts or just to modernize them. And then sometimes where the labor, I call it labor of love, comes in is when the committee is passionate about a particular area like equity, and then you do the work of going through the policy that exists with that lens and then bringing those things to the committee. So much of the heavy lift is really about modernizing, and that there's resources for that, recommendations for those.
Are we putting you down?
Yeah.
Okay. And is there anyone that feels that they have a good grasp of Robert's rules that would like to step into the role of parliamentarian? Member Jensen?
I have way too much on my plate right now.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, we don't have to have one right now.
I don't, I'm just. I'm good. So I don't think there's any like responsibility outside of like the school board meeting for that. Would that still be too much for you to take on? I'm sorry, I'm putting you on the spot there. I'm not trying to.
No, like I don't mind doing it, like maybe this meeting and the next one, but all I'm gonna say publicly is that I'm very overwhelmed right now and I can't take on anything else. So sorry.
Thank you. All right, so we'll leave it as is for now. Agenda item number 7. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
And Tanya, I don't want to put you on the spot, but what one of our earlier meetings, you were considering parliamentarian. Is that an issue now for you, or?
I have a stronger desire to spend my time reading policy and curriculum versus Robert's rules.
Okay, agenda item number 7, to receive and approve the second reading of policy BED, remote participation in school board meetings.
And so this is a second read to a policy that you approved recently. As a first read, we took language directly from the recommended language of the law. And really, this builds around making sure our meetings are accessible and that if people are participating remotely, there's access to others remotely and there's reasonable cause for accessing the meeting remotely. It hasn't been an issue for this committee. I don't see it being an issue. So my recommendation would be to adopt it.
Member Whitlow?
I'll go ahead and move that we approve the second reading of policy BED.
Second.
Any further discussion? City Council?
Yes.
Yes. Ward 1,
Yes.
2,
Yes.
4,
Yes.
5,
Yes.
6,
No.
7.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-1.
Agenda item number 8, report from City Council representative.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We don't have a whole lot to report on tonight. We did add a new city councilor to Ward 2. And I know we're currently taking applications for the vacant Ward 3 spot here in the school committee. So if anyone in the public is interested and lives in Ward 3, please apply.
Thank you. Agenda item number 9, report from school committee chair, and I do not have anything to report. Oh, I take that back. I think I mentioned this last time, but I wanted to give another reminder. This Saturday from 10 to 1, the Lewiston Area Public Health Committee is hosting a rally for recovery in Kennedy Park. There'll be food trucks, a dunk tank, face painting for kids, other food, and public speakers around recovery and counselors and a whole bunch of resources. It should be a fun event. Saturday, Kennedy Park from 10 to 1. That's all I have. Agenda item number 10 is report from superintendent.
I have some updates tonight, and I think that I like going back to this format. This is kind of how we used to do it. And for a while there, we made items agenda items, but they were really superintendent updates. So again, I'm open to feedback on this shifting of format, going back to what we once did. Big issues currently right now around the fire that was this past weekend. Just a devastating scenario for those families. My latest count was that we had 38 students that were displaced by those fires, both at 226 Blake, which is a total loss, and then 220 Blake right next door had so much water and smoke damage from the fire effort, the fireman effort to put it out. So all the families in those those buildings are displaced. The counts can shift because not everybody has gone to a local hotel where they went last night after we worked hard to provide resources at the high school as an emergency shelter. But I see it as an opportunity to say our community is just amazing. And the things that were brought together, it was really special in a terrible situation. The amount of food donations from local businesses, clothes, financial donations, people that still want to help, transportation. Hudson, our partner with busing, offered, do you need to move people from here to there? Do you need to store things? What do you need to do? They were willing to help. Jason Fuller, who essentially lived at the gym this weekend, just to make sure that the doors were open and we were there to welcome people and facilitate everything we needed. Our high school nurse went and got prescriptions for people because they lost everything. So she found out what people needed and she called pharmacies and she jumped in her own vehicle and she chased that stuff down. Store next door folks, which is something that this committee has supported greatly, had resources to sorry, the lights are going out, they're back. Had the resources to respond immediately. Our homeless liaison, Dan Sansucci, was on site passing out cards to people just to make sure they knew who to call once this settles or immediately. Katie Krantz and Jamie Cowett, who's the store next door, and Joel, just outfitting kids with things. And I heard some things yesterday that, and I say this to put a silver lining on it a bit, but we had staff that work at Lewiston High School or are connected to programming that we're able to provide as a community and as a school department, having conversations with students about toothbrushes and feminine hygiene and what size underwear they needed. And because when you have a fire like this, you have nothing. And this morning we had a bus go to the Ramada because that's where some of the students are. And they were running a little behind, which is understandable. So the bus didn't have anyone to pick up. But as I was there talking to the Red Cross, lead person on site, 6 kids came down and they were ready to go to school. They had decent clothes to wear. They didn't look shabby. I'm an emotional guy. You guys know that about me, but the resiliency is just unbelievable. So proud to be a part of the community when we're working through those kinds of scenarios. I'm sure I forgot people. If I did, I apologize. But the amount of people that fielded phone calls, and me, Karen, and Bill, all Saturday, all Sunday, Tyler, Ty, both who have a lot of kids, Connor's staff who left wherever they were and came here Saturday night just in case, whatever we can pass out, whatever you need. It was a bright thing in a tragic event. So we look at the positive in those. COVID, still a very active thing. I know that masking became the decision of the committee in a tight vote. So that masking is in place during the school day. It allows us to navigate certain provisions within the state's rules. The state calls it a standard operating procedure. So anybody can access this publicly. If you go to it, it'll tell you the latest version we had was updated August 12th. My understanding is we'll have an update again this week, not changing criteria, just clarifying a couple things that people found confusing. But kids have had no issues with putting masks on. We are working through some scenarios where we're looking at getting different size masks because students are going through the disposable ones and want to make sure we have the right size for different kids, especially at elementary level. You can have some really small kids physically and then some other kids that are, not as small. So we're looking at different sizes and making sure we can bridge those gaps. We've worked closely with different community organizations. I work in my office with the lights off all the time, so I'm fine. If I'll just continue. We're coming to find that the rules for community are very different for those of school. And as we bring pool testing online, which we have people visiting this week to help us with our site coordination, they're actually at Connors here today and working through other schools throughout the week. So that will be up and running soon. And we're encouraging people, if they're interested, to make sure you sign your consent form for your students or for yourself if you're 18 or older, because without that, we can't do that. Yeah, messaging's kind of coming out from different places actively. I would say if you haven't seen anything in the next couple of days, let me know and I can circle that back around. There was language around 30% of students having to test. The state has backed off of that language. That is no longer a requirement. The benefits to pool testing are really for those that are not vaccinated and for live information. And so I still remain in a place of encouraging people to pool test. But again, it's kind of an opt-in. You have to sign the consent. And once we're pool testing, anyone who is part of the pool testing, even if you're a close contact, you're allowed to stay at school. You may need to quarantine in the community, but you're allowed to stay at school. So that's coming off online pretty soon. One of the challenges that we're finding this year that's very different from last year is the rules in the community are very different from the rules of school. And so, for example, in a classroom with kids wearing masks, you have to be within 3 feet of someone for 15 minutes or more in any given day over a 2-day window to be considered a close contact. In the community, if you're playing a sport, as an example, because there's physical contact and things of that nature, it's not an option. So the kid who would have to quarantine as a close contact from school, if it happens in the community, you can't come to school. And there's criteria in this SOP that once we're pool testing, if you're that close contact at school, you can actually stay at school, but they don't want you doing the community thing. But one example, my son who plays football in town, not yet for the schools because he's not old enough, there was a positive on that team on Sunday, and every one of the kids on that team that played on that field for 10 days are quarantined. And so that's a real challenge. Whereas if it happened in a school connected event, once we're pool testing, those kids would still be able to access school, but they're asked to quarantine outside of school. So we're navigating those different rules, and we only know what's reported to us, and we don't always get names. We just get sometimes an organization or a team. We try to share that information so we know who's showing up for school, who's not, and doing our best with contact tracing. Our nurses have been amazing navigating this new operating procedure and the rules around it. I've even had a couple nurses have to walk me through some things, so I fully understand and comprehend the tracing and how far back and the details. But I think we're there now we are all on the same page with knowing those. But it's been different this year because of the community piece. And last year, our nurses worked a lot of off hours, a lot of weekends, and Karen, Bill, and I, and all this contact tracing and phone calls and letters. And it's different this year. It actually feels like it's more, but it feels like it's more because people know how to navigate different components, and the community rules are different. And so we're working with our nurses on how we make sure they're taken care of. Some of the conversation with the state even recently said, if it's happening on a weekend, it's actually okay to wait till Monday. Our nurses would disagree. I think public health concerns would disagree. So they're not interested in that, to be honest. Our nurses want to help figure it out. And so we're going to make sure we have a pulse on them and make sure we take care of them as they do that work. One last piece, just to give you an update now that a lot has happened in a very short window of time. But last Wednesday we did, so Wednesday or Thursday, Thursday, I believe, there was a burial for a student who took her own life, and very tragic, very sad. It's the hardest thing we do in education is to lose kids. So we're thankful that everybody, all of our kids anyway, made it Saturday, but it was pretty scary there for a little bit. But we're in school, we're full-time, we're in person. We've got the rules pretty much figured out. Teachers are putting in routines to help mitigate spacing wherever they can. Kids are happy. Most kids are feeling pretty good right now, I think, to be back in school. So that's my update. So answer any questions people might have.
Any questions? Member Bowden?
Sorry, I have a question regarding sports and masking. Right now, currently at Lewiston High School, I think the only indoor sport is volleyball. And those students have been told that they need to mask because they're indoors. In a scenario where it is after school hours, is that something that we have told them they have to do, or this isn't an MPA recommendation necessarily. Where do we draw the line? Like, who makes that decision? And is there any way around masking athletes while they're participating in sports? Is my question, basically.
So the masking for athletes it was what they just call a local decision. I had a conversation with our athletic director and talked about what's the smartest thing to do with the things that we know right now. And that was how we came to the determination that the indoors sports activity would be masked, because there's no distancing. Obviously, physical contact is something that can happen. And so we went with that language around that. We also have students masking for after school activities like 21st century and things like that. So if they're staying after to do those things in those spaces in school, even though it's not during the school day, if it's indoors, we're still at this time wearing masks.
Member Bowden, Beaupont?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Getting back to the response to the Blake Street fire, please, I think I speak for all of the committee, are how proud and pleased we are of you and your team that did all of these things that were so necessary. So thank you very much for all you and your team have done.
I appreciate that, but I will emphasize it's a team, and we have a great community, but thank you.
Member Potvin?
So Jay, getting back to the masking piece, is there a schedule that the state and the CDC review the activities of the state or the individual counties? How often do they actually come out with a, where are you at right now type thing that since we're gauging, we have that 4 bubble gauge that we're using. How do you use that? How often does it come out, and how will we know where we're at?
It's a good question. And I've gotten some of these from members of the public throughout the week, last couple of weeks. The gauge right now, my understanding, is produced by the federal CDC, and it updates almost live. So it can actually change in a day. It's not like last year where it was like every 2 weeks, or if you went to yellow or red, it was every week. It's become essentially live. So I go into their dashboard and look on a regular basis. We've remained at the high level for the last week or so. I might have missed a day. The only time I see kind of delays in shifts are if they're not doing testing and things like that on the weekend, but then we see it Monday, Tuesday when we come back in to the work week and the labs are done. So that's a regular, consistent, revolving basis. One thing I heard recently, and I don't know if it was Dr. Shah or superintendent's meeting, was that there's essentially not always, but in a lot of these bubbles, there's about a 9-week swing to them. So they start to ramp up. They go about 4.5 weeks to a peak, and then they start to peter off a little bit. And again, it's like a 9-week window. We're probably in the midst of that in our community from a data perspective. So we'll see how it plays out, but we could be, here's hoping, on a downward trend here pretty soon. But that's to be seen. And pool testing will help mitigate some of that, because we'll be able to catch those asymptomatic folks that are in schools that are potentially spreading things and they don't even know it. This testing should help pick those up. Give us, and I mentioned that because it gives us a live data set right here. So the bigger county perspective with hospitals and colleges and whatnot, that data can be questioned in some ways. I think the best data that we'll have is if we have good participation in pool testing, because we'll know this school had blank or 0 or.
And anyone can check that rank,
Well,
that 4-scale ranking at any time.
That was my next question. For the benefit of the public, what is the exact site that this information is processed at?
I will show you, and we can share this, but it's the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention site, and I have it up right now. Let me just make sure it's refreshed. I will share my screen so people can see what I look at when I go look. And again, this is absolutely available to the public. So this is what they call the integrated county view. This is Androscoggin County, obviously. This is saying the 13th, so that's today. But essentially what we're really starting to look at are the number of cases. That positivity rate is something I know they look at very closely. That was as high last week as almost 7%, which is a really high number. I know that from a low community transmission perspective, they start looking at 2% or less before they start backing off of some of the criteria. I don't know how that will play out in this, but last year that was a big factor. It was that 2% or less positivity rate. So being at 4.89, that's actually already dropped from, like I said, it might have been last Friday that I checked, and it was at almost 7%. It was like 6.9 something.
So so the site's name is COVID.
covid.cdc.gov/COVID data tracker.
Data tracker at cdc.gov.
If you Google just COVID data tracker, and you get to that county view, that's where you can look specifically at the state. There's a map further down that shows you different. There's all kinds of data in here. I know I'm kind of scrolling fast, but it talks about the demographics, the breakdown, what you see, and how many people are vaccinated, things of that nature. So.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask one more question in regard to sports. And I know that the winter season isn't here yet, and we don't know what the winter season is going to look like. But with pool testing being implemented, is there a possibility that could change the masking rules for our athletes?
Good question. No, I think that's a great question. I hadn't thought of it from that angle. It's certainly possible, especially if our transmission rate gets down lower. The challenge with pool testing is, from what I've been told, is it doesn't count for extracurricular activities, but it doesn't keep you out of school, if that makes sense. It's different from a classroom exposure, and they're really trying to get people to narrow down when the potential exposure was. But pool testing, it can help mitigate and preserve sports in the way of, if you're pool testing and you have, what we've heard from other schools is that there's a bump initially. You will have positives early on. And then in a 10-day window, because you isolate those, and those students quarantine, you start to see your numbers drop rapidly because those asymptomatic people are not in the general population. And so with pool testing, maybe not as much as like the tool for the moment or before the game or the week of practice, but more so in the way of, we're catching these things sooner so that they don't spread in the population, and then all of a sudden it's better, especially at the high school level. The way the language is written, and this isn't an endorsement on my part, the way the language is written from the operating procedure, I believe really encourages people to get vaccinated. And I know that that's a personal choice, but if you're vaccinated, it is the card you can play to stay engaged with all kinds of things. And the next layer to that is masking. And then the third layer to that is really the pool testing as it relates to school. Just the way the language is written. When it comes to extracurriculars, there is some variations. But one mitigation strategy over the other could in fact be considered. And as of right now, just for what it's worth, it is a local decision. So there are some schools that we compete against that they aren't masking for volleyball matches, for example.
Member Damon.
On that topic a little bit, Jake, I noted that the president just sort of enacted a executive order, I guess, or rule that any employer with over 100 employees, which certainly would include the Lewiston School Department, do we need to take a position on that? Or are we going to wait to see what the fallout is from that at the larger national level?
Yep. So we've been watching and looking at that language closely. It's hard to know what things will be carried out and in which ways. And so the most recent conversation we had, Karen and I attended a session this morning that this was one of the topics, and the Department of Education is looking into it because they're not sure how to read or what the read is on it. That this applies to public schools, private schools, federal contracts versus federal funding, because we have federal funding, but we're not a federal contractor, and I guess there's language connected to the statements around that. And so I'm inclined to wait and see what the Department of Ed and the state deciphers that to mean. I think vaccinations are highly controversial in the public, obviously, and I don't feel comfortable making a recommendation that we do anything other than what we have to do at this point in time. If it's mandated, I think that that's going to be a significant conversation and process. I don't know how you impose fines on public schools if you have staff that refuse to vaccinate. I don't know how we stay open if we have staff refuse to vaccinate and we have to turn them away. And I know this has happened in some other industries with some hospitals that have had to curb certain things like optional surgeries or more elective type things because their hospitals are so full because of COVID. While that's maybe happening in some places, there's other places they just don't have the nursing staff to care for patients after the fact. So I really don't want to find ourselves in that situation. The other area of concern was around mandated vaccine versus having to test. And there's a lack of clarity there if that's an option or not. So there's some things that the legal folks are out there that are going to have to decipher some of this language.
Any other discussion? Any online members like to participate? No hands? Is that all? You don't need anything else from us. Agenda item number 11, school committee community announcements. No. Great. Agenda item number 12, future agenda items. Member Potman.
It's been brought to my attention, and probably several of you have seen the emails. I guess one person raised the issue, and it's been echoed by numerous parents, and that's regarding political statements being stated within the classrooms. And I guess I'd like to have a discussion on what our policy surrounding that is. And one thing I'm very cognizant of is in our world that we're living in today, what may have flew 10 years ago is very sharp right now. But where both sides are pointed against each other, I think we need to talk about what the inside of a classroom looks like and what's being said or proposed or supported, and that where we can make some sort of an effort to be as apolitical as possible while still drawing, some attention to the items at hand to discuss. So I guess I'd like that a greater discussion.
Member Jensen.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Do you have any examples, or what specifically are you talking about?
Well, the ones that have been put forward, one particularly that's standing out is the Black Lives Matter movement, and that it's being posted within the classrooms. And the thing of it is with any movement, Black Lives Matter, or any of them, there's always some discussion about some portion of that unit or what they may do or what they may disagree with. So there's always that controversy that hovers around these movements, and, agree with it or disagree with it. There's always the opposing view. And I guess that, I could understand, do we want our classrooms to go into those larger debate shops, and are we putting one group of the city against another city, or, how are we resolving this as opposed to the statement just being put up there, of Black Lives Matter, and it's is there a better way of handling that? And I think there's many families have expressed, that they don't particularly disagree with what the discussion's about. They disagree with it being posted in the classrooms. So it's like, okay, is there a venue of which we can address this better than just posting stuff up on the walls in classrooms? Or is classrooms supposed to be specific to the studies at hand? So I think that was just one example. And the others are, I think you can just put it all in one basket of one side of the country against the other, and our city's no different than the rest of the country. And it's like just trying to diffuse where people are getting upset and have that discussion of what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, how can things be better addressed, and what is the I think the big question that was out there is what's the temperature of the classroom? If we have teachers talking about something, all these issues are very 50-50. There's two sides to each one. So the thing that's getting to these parents is if you have a teacher talking one way and the other side's not represented, are these really the issues we want to have boiling in the classrooms? So and I just think that we kind of got to get a hold of this before, other things happen in the country that, we have to, see it spill over into the schools and families, et cetera, so on. So.
Any other future agenda items? Agenda item number 13, to enter into executive session to discuss a legal matter in accordance with 1 MRSA 4056E. Is there a motion?
Yes.
Second,
City Council Rep. Oh,
yes.
yes. Ward 1,
Yes.
Ward 2,
Yes.
Ward 4,
Yes.
Ward 5,
Yes.
Ward 6,
Yes.
Ward 7.
Yes.
Thank you. The school committee will enter executive session at 6:22 PM.